I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up,
There's increased demand for mobility to venture out, to experience new things and new cultures. And that has been manifest in the numbers.
once stalled, now booming. A look at the rebound of international travel.
We've seen the shrinking of the coastline. We've seen our beaches literally disappearing before our eyes.
Addressing climate action in tourism. What's being done to protect both nature and visitors. And how artificial intelligence is helping create a functional and sustainable industry. Next.
Tourism is one of the biggest economic drivers in the world. The industry took a major hit when COVID-19 began to spread, but it is on the rebound. This year, tourism is expected to finally return to pre-pandemic levels. In this edition of UN Insider, we'll take a look at the state of the industry and the increased emphasis on sustainable tourism. Overall, the UN Tourism Confidence Index gives a positive outlook for the industry, though economic and geopolitical headwinds remain. An estimated 285 million tourists traveled internationally in the first few months of 2024, about a 20% increase from the same period in 2023. Travel to the Americas has practically returned to pre-pandemic numbers, while visitors are heading to the Middle East at higher rates. Africa and Europe have exceeded pre-pandemic levels, and Chinese tourists are helping the recovery in Asia and the Pacific. A growing number of visa-free travel programs between China and other nations is helping fuel demand.
The series of policies and measures of facilitation not only enables foreign tourists to experience world heritages, such as Beijing's hutongs, appreciate the dazzling night scenery on the Bund in Shanghai, and explore history and culture in ancient buildings of Shanxi, but also shortens the distance between China and the rest of the world.
Travel and tourism are often vital to developing countries. I spoke with the 78th UN General Assembly President Dennis Francis about the role tourism plays in the global economy. President Francis, tourism accounted for 3% of global GDP last year. It employs 1 in every 10 people around the world. How important is this industry economically, especially for developing nations and small island developing states?
Extremely important. In fact, some analysts describe tourism as the lifeblood or backbone of the economy of small island developing states in particular, but also of large countries. I suppose what we have witnessed is the fact that after the lockdown of COVID, there's increased demand for mobility to venture out, to experience new things and new cultures. And that has been manifest in the numbers. But we need to ensure that tourism is also sustainable, because in many instances, particularly in the case of small island developing states, it's based on a resource, a natural resource much of the time. And so we have to be very, very careful that tourism is managed in a very sustainable way, because we want that resource, those natural resources, to exist in perpetuity. They are assets. That's what they are, natural assets. And like any asset, you want it to grow, thrive, multiply, and create income for as long as is possible.
President Francis, you recently paid a visit to your home country of Trinidad and Tobago during a time when we've been experiencing the hottest temperatures in history. What impact has climate change had on tourism there, other parts of the Caribbean, other parts of the world?
Well, in fact, it's been pretty much the same for Trinidad and Tobago. We are having the effects. In Trinidad and Tobago, there are basically two seasons. There used to be basically two seasons. The dry season from January to June, and the wet season, the rainy season from June to December. Now, it's not quite clear which season is wet and which season is dry. And not only that, the country has suddenly become subject to flash flooding of a type that we did not have before. Our coastline is being affected by sea level rise. We are losing coastline at a relatively rapid rate. The reality is that we now have to adjust the way we live to take account of the fact that climate change is a reality now. It's not tomorrow. It's not next week. It's now. It's affecting us now. And so we need to develop strategies and take urgent action to mitigate the implications and the impacts of climate change if we are to be able to succeed as a modern civilization. When we say it's existential in the case of sea level rise, there is no hyperbole here. There is no exaggeration. This is real. It is real. And therefore, reasonable response has to be based on taking action to forestall and to mitigate the deleterious effects and impacts of climate change on our societies and on our ability to sustain our lifestyles and livelihoods.
During your most recent diplomatic travels around the world, from Asia to Europe to the Caribbean, what were some of your impressions of this industry that you noticed around you? And when you talk about sustainable tourism, how can tourists be more sustainable when they visit some of these places?
Many of the tour operators themselves can adopt practices or guidelines that help in preserving sustainability. It was my good fortune to have visited Bali earlier this year. And I'm told that Bali has gone a very long way of becoming fully sustainable because they understand and have internalized the fact that if they do not protect this resource on which so much of their economy depends, they will lose it and lose the income that it generates. So they have taken aggressive action to boost sustainability, and sensibly so, as are other places. How can people become more sustainable in their actions? Most of the tourism nowadays, well, a significant portion of it anyway, takes place through the cruise industry. And so that industry itself needs to take a long, deep look at what additional measures it can employ to boost sustainability. But people need to take personal responsibility. As individuals, we all need to make a contribution, and we can, to sustainability. So, for example, in the types of products that we use, hopefully, I'm sure that it would be a positive forward step. For example, if the cruise industry were to get rid of plastic usage on board their ships, because plastics, as you know, pose a dire threat to the environment. The statistic is that if we continue at current rates of usage of plastic, by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Try consuming grilled plastic for dinner. Doesn't work. We have got to take action. And there's no time like the present.
President Francis, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Coming up.
Aloha. It's a deep-rooted concept in the Native Hawaiian culture. It's, something that's like sacred to us.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Jamaica has long been known as a sought-after travel destination. I sat down with the country's UN ambassador, Brian Wallace. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tourism in your country is booming. $1.27 billion just in the first quarter of this year, and it looks like that's only the beginning. People are drawn to your gorgeous beaches and your green spaces. Is it full steam ahead for your tourism industry?
Well, tourism is of critical importance to Jamaica's development prospects. We have been blessed with a beautiful country, with a people who are warm and hospitable, and if I may say, vibesy. And so the ability to use this industry as a tool for our development is something that the government has embraced. Just last year, Jamaica led the process towards the commemoration of February 17 as Global Tourism Resilience Day. Because the COVID-19 experience taught us that the global tourism industry is subject to shocks. The pandemic was a shock. It's also subject to political shocks, to economic shocks, to natural disaster shocks. And so because it is so intertwined, and because it's such a conduit for relationships with other states, with other cultures, with other peoples, it is important for us to have a healthy global economy, one that can withstand these shocks. And so we work very hard, not just to develop our own tourism industry and to welcome as many as we can accommodate into our homes and to develop the infrastructure sustainably to do that. We are pressing for greater investment in our tourism industry in a way that protects and preserves not just the environment, but the capacity of our own people to enjoy the bounties of our country. We're very pleased with the progress that we've been able to make, especially since the pandemic, to recover so quickly and to continue our growth path. But we still have some more targets that we need to hit, and we're working very hard towards achieving those.
What were some of those lessons learned post-pandemic that you would want to share with countries that are also trying to build their tourism industry?
Well, the lesson is that you can't wait to make these investments. Because if we are constantly in the waiting game to earn enough to be able to invest, then you will always be behind, and your people will get left behind when there is an exogenous shock like the pandemic. And so finding the wherewithal to be able to prioritize investments in health and in education, which were exposed dramatically during the pandemic, is critical. It's one of the reasons why another one of our priorities as a country and as a government is to press for appropriate financing for development so that those fiscal gaps can be closed and that fiscal space can open up for us to be able to invest in these areas.
Surely you've noticed changes over the years in your country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I come from a part of Jamaica called Negril, which is on the west end of the island, a tourist resort. And we've seen the shrinking of the coastline. We've seen our beaches literally disappearing before our eyes. Thankfully, they're not gone yet, and we still have, 7 miles of beautiful white sand beach left, but we can see the impact. And so it is an imperative for us to be very firm and loud advocates to those who don't experience it in the same way, to ensure that action is taken, and that countries like ours, small island developing states like Jamaica, are adequately prepared and provided for in the event of a catastrophic disaster. These are impacts of climate change as well. So, the spin-off on our agricultural sector as well is it hampers our ability to feed our population. This is why we are such loud advocates in the international system for the globe to address climate change, because we do, as you say, we feel it, we see it, we live it.
Ambassador Brian Wallace, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The U.S. state of Hawaii has experienced the devastating impact of climate change. In August 2023, wildfires decimated the historic town of Lahaina on the island of Maui. The blaze killed more than 100 people, destroyed some 2,200 structures, and caused about $6 billion in damages. Today, the area's recovery remains uncertain. For many residents, rebuilding includes re-evaluating how tourism intersects with local communities and environmental sustainability. Alistair Baverstock explains.
The remote Pacific archipelago of Hawaii has been inhabited for over 1,600 years. Originally settled by the seafaring Polynesian culture, which stretches as far south as the Maori of New Zealand, they named the islands the Paia'aina, the land of flowers. Over the course of centuries, Hawaiian culture developed in almost total isolation from the rest of the world. Lahaina was an important cultural centre, today represented by Tamara Paltin on Maui's County Council.
Lahaina was the capital of the Hawaiian Kingdom for a period of time under King Kamehameha III before it was relocated to Oahu. And there's still many sacred sites, but it's not the buildings or the structures that make it sacred. It's the location and the people and the way we interact that makes it sacred.
Hawaii's first contact with the outside world was the arrival of the British explorer Captain James Cook in 1778. The Kingdom of Hawaii struggled through the succeeding century through various iterations of independent nationhood before the overthrow of 1893 and subsequent annexation to the United States in 1898. Following the Second World War and its importance in the Pacific Campaign against Japan, Hawaii was given statehood in 1959, becoming America's 50th state. However, for many indigenous Hawaiians, that history is problematic.
Some people get defensive if you talk about Hawaii being an occupied nation. If we don't want to say a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, doesn't mean we hate all Americans. I just don't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance until America does the right thing. So it's a very unique situation.
Today, the island of Maui depends on tourism, with visitor spending making up 40% of the island's GDP. But that stands at odds with the proud Polynesian culture of its original inhabitants. Kekoa Lansford is a native of Lahaina.
We're a warrior culture, we're a noble culture, but we're not a host culture. This idea of aloha, it exists, but the hotel version of it doesn't exist.
Indeed, the true meaning of aloha to the Hawaiian people is what will now help them to recover from the tragedy of Lahaina in 2023.
Aloha, it's a deep-rooted concept in the Native Hawaiian culture. It's, you know, something that's like sacred to us, you know? It means love. You really love something. You don't change it, you don't take advantage of it, you don't abuse it, you don't molest it, you know what I mean? You don't hurt it. You help it thrive, you know, you help it live, you help it be happy. Whatever it is, you know, aloha.
Coming up.
AI for trip planning, for forecasting, is becoming much quicker in terms of adoption.
UN Insider.
"360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. Biz Talk, only on CGTN.
Technology and innovation can be key to finding sustainable solutions. Alex Manns is the CEO of Flyer, a platform that uses AI to modernize the travel industry. Alex, how does AI and technology make travel more sustainable?
That's a great question. So if I look at Flyer side of the equation, we help airlines better forecast demand, which in turn allows them to determine what aircraft should I put on a route. So instead of putting too big of an aircraft on a route that is not fully populated in terms of demand, they can downgauge to a smaller aircraft and save fuel, or vice versa. Instead of flying 2 planes, they can fly 1 larger plane. So we help them forecast demand and optimize that capacity planning. Outside of our realm, airlines are very much shifting to a sustainable aviation fuel. I think the biggest challenge in that realm right now is manufacturing and the price of sustainable aviation fuel. But there too, AI is trying to help determine what is the mix of normal fuel and SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, I should combine on different routes to still make a profit while reducing my effective carbon footprint.
When it comes to technology in the travel industry, what are regions that have been quick to embrace AI technology, and what are some regions that are still hesitant, have some concerns, slow to go?
Yeah, so the regions where competition and growth of travel demand are the most rapid tend to be the ones that innovate more, especially in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of the Middle East. You have a very large, young, natively digital population. They were born on their phone, they do everything on their phone. Countries like Saudi Arabia, right? It's got the youngest population in the Middle East. Everybody has an iPhone. That tends to be the region or the regions where innovation is kind of front and center, where AI for trip planning, for forecasting, is becoming much quicker in terms of adoption than, say, North America or Europe, where you have larger or legacy players that move slower on innovation.
What's the one thing that you would tell companies or just regular people when it comes to new technology and AI? Would you say, don't be afraid, embrace it? Because there's so many negative connotations that you hear out there.
Yeah, I would say definitely embrace it. Like companies that do not implement or start leveraging AI to be better at what they do will fall behind. But be practical, right? Use it in places where your consumer actually is helped, the customer is helped by the way you apply AI. Do it in ways that actually help you improve your revenue or reduce your cost or help you gain the capability travelers and customers want. I think there's a lot of hype around AI. I think there's a lot of misuse of AI. Just be practical. Like be practical in how and where you deploy it, and do it for the purpose of your customer.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Elaine.
What does sustainable tourism look like? Francis Coe takes us to a city where sustainability is always a focus.
With views like this, you might say Mother Nature is Vancouver's unofficial ambassador. About 11 million tourists visit Vancouver every year. And the biggest attractions center on the city's natural beauty. The crown jewel, Stanley Park, with the world's longest uninterrupted waterfront path, a haven for cyclists and pedestrians. The 400-hectare green oasis shaded by 500,000 trees. Another draw, the Capilano Suspension Bridge, stretching 140 meters and hovering 70 heart-stopping meters above the Capilano River.
Look around you. We're nestled in the heart of downtown Vancouver against a backdrop of the beautiful British Columbia mountains and oceanfront.
Those in the tourism business know Vancouver's big selling point is its scenery, and they've taken great pains to show visitors how they're protecting it.
We take a lot of pride in it.
The Vancouver Convention Center has a prime spot to welcome out-of-towners. The reverence to the environment isn't window dressing.
Instead of building a convention center and trying to make it sustainable, it is actually integrated into every aspect. It's in every part of our fabric.
Quite literally. When the 100,000 square meters of the center's west building was completed in 2009, it solidified itself as one of the world's most sustainable convention facilities. That core foundation reflected in the walls, comprised of 1 million pieces of wood from sustainably managed forests in British Columbia. The center's kitchen uses locally sustainably sourced food.
It's a core of my profession and my passion. Juice the beet, add some sugar to it and some maple syrup to it.
Many of the ingredients come from the Green Roof, home to more than 400,000 indigenous plants, providing a natural habitat for animals and a natural cooling system for the building.
This is where most of the biological activity happens, where the bacteria will break down the sewage.
And at the bottom, an on-site wastewater treatment plant whose sophisticated system recycles wastewater back into the toilets and rooftop irrigation system.
This is what the water looks like coming in. The middle one is what the water looks like coming out of our membrane tanks. And the last one is after we add a little bit of chlorine.
How much comes in here?
I'd say on average we're looking around 90 cubic meters, so 90,000 liters a day, and around 2 million liters a month.
Across the way, a different view of the waterfront, but the same vision.
We have noticed since the past few years that people are really looking for sustainability, and they don't want you to just say you're sustainable, they want numbers. People want to leave less of a carbon footprint, and they want to feel good about traveling.
The hotel created quite the buzz in 2008 when it became one of the first hotels to introduce rooftop hives, home to 250,000 native bees.
I'm completely connected to them.
Lovingly tended to by Chief Beekeeper Julia Common.
Like this? Yeah, and under your bill. Yep. You'll taste a bit of a savory taste, which is the pollen, fermented bee bread, and that's total protein. It's like steak.
The bees produce 90 kilograms of honey a year, a treasure trove for the hotel's sustainably minded chefs.
We wouldn't have so many types of foods that grow because of the pollination of bees. Honey lavender macaroons, rooftop honey truffle, and one of my favorites is to serve honey with cheese. I think it's just a classic pairing, and it's absolutely beautiful.
That's really nice. The Fairmont Hotel's model helped propel Vancouver to an important distinction: the city with the most sustainable hotels in the world. Here, putting Vancouver's best face forward, almost second nature.
Being in nature is such a big part of who we are.
Frances Coe, CGTN, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.